It all started on an ordinary Tuesday evening. The kind of evening where everything feels normal, quiet, peaceful, and predictable. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when I stumbled upon an ad for an app. The app was called SpyTrack, and the description said something along the lines of, "Discover who's watching you in real time." At first, I thought it was a joke. Another one of those creepy apps designed to get your attention, but with no real purpose. But there was something oddly compelling about it. Maybe it was a curiosity, or maybe it was the fact that I had just broken up with my longtime girlfriend, leaving me with too much time on my hands. Whatever the reason, I tapped on the ad. The app's page loaded quickly, displaying a sleek, minimalist interface. There were no user reviews, just a single button that said "Download now." Against my better judgment, I pressed it. The app installed quickly, and soon I was looking at a screen that appeared to be completely blank. Just a gray background with the app's logo in the center, a dark eye within an eye. I thought it was odd, but I was intrigued. The app didn't ask for any sign-in information. No permissions to access your photos, camera, or location. Just a single button at the bottom. Start tracking. I tapped it. The screen flashed black for a moment, and when it returned to normal, something changed. The app's background was now filled with a grid of small squares, each displaying a different view. Some showed people walking on city streets. Others captured quiet moments in homes. The images weren't just random, they were live feeds, and they were all watching people. I froze. My heart began to race. This was not just some random app. The more I stared, the more I realized that the feeds weren't from security cameras. These weren't public cameras or surveillance footage. These were people, ordinary people like me. I could see their faces, their lives unfolding in real time, as though they were unknowingly being watched by someone, me. I checked the settings again, trying to understand what I had just downloaded, but there were no instructions, no help option, just that blank page with the small grids. I scrolled to the feeds, each one more unsettling than the last. People in their bedrooms, walking down the street, sitting in cafes, looking around nervously as if they knew something was wrong but couldn't put their finger on it. I tried closing the app, but it wouldn't shut down. I restarted my phone. Nothing. It was like it had somehow embedded itself into my device, tethered to it in some dark, twisted way. Panic started to rise in me as I realized I had no way of removing it. Then the first notification appeared. It was a message from SpyTrack itself. "We are watching you now." A chill ran through my spine. My hands shook as I read the message. My first instinct was to look around my apartment, but I quickly dismissed it. It was just some kind of marketing trick, right? The app was just trying to get under my skin to keep me hooked. But as I stared at the message, something shifted. The feeds on my screen started to change. The faces of the people on the grid blurred into static, then returned to reveal something else. A figure, a shadowy form, standing still, watching the grid of people. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and stared again. It was me. There on the screen was a live feed of my own apartment, the dim light from the street lamp casting long shadows across the floor. It was my living room. But I wasn't standing in front of the phone. I was sitting right here, right now. I quickly snapped the phone from my hands, my breath coming faster as I felt my pulse race. What was happening? How could the app be showing me my own apartment? My mind raced through all the possibilities. Was someone spying on me through my camera? Had I been hacked? I immediately checked my front door, the windows. Everything was locked. I was alone. I hesitated, looking at the app again. The feeds were still active. There was no option to log out, no escape button. The eerie sensation of being watched crawled over me. Sensation of my own eyes being turned inward, as though I was on the other side of the glass looking in. Then my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't just a message. The notification read, "You are being watched." I didn't want to look at the screen, but something compelled me to do it. The grid had changed. Instead of showing random people, the screen now focused on a single image, a darkened alleyway. I could make out the outline of a figure standing at the far end, just barely visible under the dim light of a flickering street lamp. The figure moved slowly, stepping closer. I wasn't sure why I clicked on it, but I did. The figure came into clearer view. It was a man, tall, wearing a dark hoodie that obscured his face. But the more I stared, the more I realized something disturbing. The man wasn't just walking down the alley. He was staring at the camera, directly into the lens, as though he knew he was being watched. Then the image flickered, and new notification came through. "We can see you." My heart stopped. I felt the air grow cold, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I glanced nervously toward my front door. My apartment felt like a cage now, the walls closing in on me. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen. What had I done? What was this app? And why was it showing me things that felt so real, so personal? Before I could process what was happening, the figure in the alley moved again, this time walking directly toward the camera. As his face came into focus, my stomach twisted. He wasn't a random person. I knew him. It was someone I recognized, someone I hadn't seen in years. But it couldn't be, could it? I had to be imagining things. I slammed my phone down onto the coffee table, pacing around my living room. I checked the door again, still locked. I tried to breathe, but the weight in my chest made it harder and harder to calm down. And then, just when I thought the worst had passed, I heard a noise, a sound, faint but distinct, a soft tapping. It was coming from my window. I froze. I slowly turned, staring at the window, the curtains drawn tight. The tapping continued, almost rhythmic, like a person waiting outside. My hand was shaking as I reached for the phone again, but as I picked it up, another notification appeared. "Look out your window." I couldn't move. I couldn't think. The tapping grew louder, and my mind screamed at me to do something. But I just stood there, frozen in fear. And that's when I saw it. The shadow outside my window. You said, the shadow outside my window shifted slowly, like a person standing still, just out of view. The tapping stopped for a moment, and all I could hear was my own heartbeat pounding in my chest. I couldn't bring myself to move, couldn't tear my eyes away from the curtain. The figure, whoever it was, seemed to be waiting, like it knew I was watching, like it knew I was paralyzed by fear. I felt a sudden urge to pull the curtains open, to confront whatever was out there, but my legs felt like lead. My mind screamed at me to move, to do something, but my body refused. It was as though the shadow had taken control of me, freezing me in place, making it impossible to react. The app's notification bar buzzed again, pulling me from my stupor. I hesitated for a moment before looking down at my phone. The message read, "It's not outside, it's already inside." A cold shiver ran down my spine. I dropped the phone in shock, my hands now trembling uncontrollably. What did it mean? How could it be inside? I hadn't heard the door open. I hadn't heard any footsteps. I glanced toward the hallway leading to the front door, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw something move from the corner of my eye. My heart leaped into my throat, and before I could process it, a loud crash echoed from the hallway. I jerked my head toward the sound. The noise had come from the direction of the kitchen. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I took a step forward, my legs shaking. I needed to check to confirm, but I couldn't do it. The app on my phone was still open, the grid of people still showing on the screen, but it was different now. There were more faces. Some were blurry, their features distorted. Others seemed to be moving, flickering, like glitches in the app. And there at the center of the screen was a man from the alley, his face now clear, his eyes locked with mine, piercing through the screen with an unsettling intensity. I backed away from the phone, my thoughts a jumbled mess. What did he want? How was he connected to this app? The app that had somehow tapped into my life, my every move. I couldn't understand it, couldn't comprehend how it had all gotten so out of hand so quickly. Another loud noise. This time, the sound came from the living room, followed by the unmistakable scrape of something being dragged across the floor. I stood there, paralyzed, my mind racing through all the possibilities. Could it be an intruder? Was someone really inside my apartment, using the app to track my every move, control me like a puppet? I had to check. I had to see for myself. Summoning what little courage I had left, I took a hesitant step toward the hallway. My phone buzzed again, but this time I didn't check it. I didn't want to know. I couldn't handle any more of it. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly in front of me, the shadows seeming deeper and darker with each step I took. I reached the kitchen, but there was nothing there. No one. Just the dim light spilling in from the living room, casting long shadows along the floor. I breathed a shaky sigh of relief and turned to leave when suddenly I froze. The sound came again. This time, it was right behind me. A low whisper, barely audible at first, but growing louder, more insistent. You shouldn't have downloaded the app. I whipped around, my heart slamming into my chest. But again, there was nothing. The kitchen was empty. My hands were clammy as I took another step back, my mind racing to make sense of the impossible. I was starting to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. The whispering continued, fading in and out, a constant, haunting presence. I grabbed my phone and checked the app. The screen was no longer showing the grid of people. Instead, it was filled with a single image, a reflection of my own face, staring back at me from the screen. I looked into my eyes, searching for any sign of recognition, any clue to what was happening. But the more I stared, the more unsettled I became. My eyes were wide, bloodshot, filled with terror. It was as though the reflection was showing me someone else. Someone trapped inside the phone. A message popped up on the screen. You can't escape. I immediately dropped the phone in panic, stumbling backward as my mind spun. How could it know? How was this happening? My legs gave out, and I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. I felt trapped, cornered, as though the walls of the apartment had closed in on me. My only means of communication, the only way to understand what was going on, was the app. But I couldn't go back to it. I couldn't risk it. The whispering didn't stop. It was like 100 voices, layered on top of each other, coming from every direction. I clutched my ears, tried to block it out, but the words were seeping in, impossible to ignore. You're not in control anymore. We are. The apartment felt suffocating, the walls closing in, and I had to get out. I had to escape. I scrambled to my feet, my vision blurred by panic. I rushed to the door, flung it open, and ran into the night, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The sound of my footsteps pounding against the pavement was the only thing grounding me to reality. But even as I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, that someone or something was right behind me. I fumbled for my phone, trying to get some sense of control back. But when I glanced at the screen, my blood ran cold. The app was still open, still active, and in the grid of feeds, there was a new image. This time, it wasn't just a man from the alley. It was a dozen faces, all staring at me, eyes wide with fear, mouths open as if they were screaming for help. And there, in the center, was me. Only now, my reflection was smiling. The app had changed me. It had taken something from me. I couldn't run anymore. The walls had already started closing in. I stood frozen in the middle of the street, my legs numb beneath me. The world felt like it was spinning, like I was trapped inside a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. The city street, once familiar and comforting, now felt alien, oppressive. I was no longer in control. The app, Spy Track, had taken something from me, and I had no idea how to get it back. My phone buzzed again, pulling me out of my dazed thoughts. I hesitated for a moment, the weight of fear pressing down on me, but I knew I couldn't avoid it. I had to look. I had to understand what was happening, even if it meant facing the nightmare head-on. With trembling hands, I picked up my phone and unlocked it. The app screen was still open, and the grid of faces remained. But the images were different now. Darker, more distorted. Faces seemed to melt and shift, their eyes pleading, their mouths contorted in expressions of terror. I scrolled through the feed, my stomach twisting with every flicker. The people weren't just being watched anymore. They were being controlled. Their movements were robotic, like they were puppets on strings. And at the center of the grid, there I was, my face, staring back at me, frozen in an unnatural smile. I swiped frantically, trying to find a way to exit the app, to end this madness. But there was no way out, no way to delete it. The app had become part of me, part of my very existence, a parasite burrowing deep into my mind, slowly eroding my sense of reality. The message at the top of the screen changed again. You're just another piece of the game. I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me. The words weren't just a warning. They were a statement of fact. I was no longer an individual. I wasn't even human anymore. I was a player in this twisted game, and there was no way to escape. A strange, hollow laugh echoed in the back of my mind. The kind of laugh that didn't belong to anyone. It was a chorus of voices, distorted and warped, each one more menacing than the last. They were inside my head, taunting me, breaking me down. Suddenly, a new notification popped up on my phone. "We see you." I jerked my head up, my eyes scanning the street around me. The world was eerily quiet now. The usual sound of the city, cars passing by, people talking, completely absent. The street lamps flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally far. For a moment, everything stood still. There was no movement, no sign of life. It was like the world itself had frozen, just for me. Then the sound came, a low, guttural growl, coming from somewhere behind me. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there, just the empty street, stretching out into darkness. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt the urge to run. But where could I go? What was chasing me? How could I escape something that was inside my mind, inside my very soul? The growl came again, louder this time, closer. I spun around, my pulse racing, but still I saw nothing. It was as though the sound itself was coming from the app, like it was being transmitted to the phone, pulling me deeper into its grip. I could feel the app's presence inside my head, suffocating me, manipulating my thoughts, my actions. It was controlling me, just like it had controlled the others on the grid. The app buzzed again, and this time I couldn't ignore it. The screen flickered, and the image of my own face stared back at me. But it was different now. The smile was gone, replaced by a twisted, horrified expression. My eyes were wide with fear, and I could see the reflection of something. No, someone standing behind me in the screen. I spun around, but again there was nothing. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. How could this be happening? How could the app know what was behind me? Was I losing my mind, or was something worse at play? The growling sound grew louder, vibrating through the air, shaking me to my core. It wasn't just a noise anymore. It was a presence, a dark, malevolent force that was closing in on me, tightening around me like a vice. I glanced at my phone once more. The app's screen was now filled with messages, all from the app itself. "You cannot outrun us. You are our puppet. You belong to us now." The words echoed in my mind, drowning out everything else. I felt like I was being pulled into phone itself, sucked into the dark abyss that the app had created. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could do was stare at the screen as the grid of faces blurred and distorted, the images twisting into grotesque shapes. Then everything went black. I woke up on the cold pavement, my head throbbing, my body aching. I had no idea how long I had been lying there, but it felt like an eternity. My vision was blurry, and my ears rang with a high-pitched tone. I sat up slowly, trying to steady myself, but the world around me was disorienting. The street was still empty, still silent, like it had been before. But something was different now. The app was still open, still active. The faces on the grid were now static, their eyes wide and unblinking, staring at me from the screen. My face was still there, still grinning that twisted smile. And in the center of the screen, there was a new message. "You are part of the game now." I felt a chill run down my spine. The words weren't just a warning anymore. They were the truth. I tried to stand, but my body wouldn't cooperate. My legs felt like lead, my arms heavy and unresponsive. It was as if I was being controlled from the inside, like my own body betrayed me. The growl returned, louder than ever. It rumbled through the ground beneath me, shaking me to my very core. I looked around frantically, my heart racing, but there was nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. I couldn't escape. I was already part of it, And then the figure appeared. From the darkness, it stepped forward, tall and looming. I couldn't make out its features, but I could feel its presence, the suffocating weight of it pressing down on me. It was the same figure from the alley, the one who had been watching me through the app. But now it wasn't just watching. It was coming for me. I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream. All I could do was watch as the figure grew closer, its shadow stretching over me, swallowing the light. And then, just as it reached out for me, everything went black. The game had begun, and I was its latest player. The darkness was all-consuming. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I was still alive, still breathing, or if I'd been swallowed by the app, lost forever in its twisted digital labyrinth. There was no light, no sound, just an eerie silence pressing in from all sides. I couldn't even feel my body anymore, just a strange sensation of floating, disconnected from everything. Then, a soft hum pierced the darkness, like a distant engine turning over, and suddenly, a dim light flickered into existence. The glow was faint at first, barely enough to illuminate my surroundings. I couldn't see clearly, but I could feel it, the oppressive weight of something watching me, waiting. I gasped, my chest heaving for air, and as if on cue, the app's logo appeared in the center of the void, glowing ominously. The screen was there, right in front of me, as though the phone had materialized in the space where I floated. The grid of faces was back, and this time, they weren't distorted. They were clear, painfully real. Each face was staring at me, lifeless, like mannequins frozen in a moment of horror. But the most unsettling part? I wasn't looking at them through my phone. The faces weren't on a screen anymore. They were here, floating in the darkness with me. Trapped in this void, their eyes wide with fear and pleading. And in the center of them all, my own face stared back at me, smiling that twisted grin. But it wasn't my smile, it was something else, something that didn't belong to me. The app's message flashed again. You are part of us now. The words pulsed on the screen, each beat like the rhythm of a heart, growing louder with each passing moment. I reached out, my fingers trembling, desperate to pull away from the screen. But no matter how hard I tried, my hand wouldn't move. My body refused to respond, like I was a puppet with invisible strings pulling me in. I tried to scream, to fight back, but nothing came out. My throat was dry, my voice trapped inside, unable to escape. The growl from earlier, the one that had reverberated through my body, returned, but this time, it wasn't just a sound. It was a presence, a tangible force that seemed to vibrate through the very fabric of the air. It felt alive, aware, and it was closing in on me. The faces around me began to change. Their expressions twisted, becoming more grotesque, more desperate. Some were silent, their eyes pleading for help, while others mouthed words I couldn't hear. They were all trapped, just like me, caught in the same web that had ensnared us. The longer I looked, the more I could feel their pain, their fear, their overwhelming terror. I could feel their eyes boring into me, pulling me deeper into the nightmare. And then, something in the grid shifted. The figure, the one from the alley, the one who had been watching me, appeared again. This time, though, it wasn't a shadow. It was solid, real, its features sharp and cold, its eyes unblinking. It stepped forward, and for the first time, I saw its face clearly. It was my own. The reflection of myself, distorted and twisted, grinned at me, and the app's message changed once again. You can never escape. You are already one of us. The figure reached out, its hand cold and hard like stone. I wanted to recoil, to run, but there was nowhere to go. I couldn't move, couldn't escape. The figure's hand closed around my wrist, its grip like ice, sending a wave of cold through my entire body. The app's grip on me was tightening, its power increasing, pulling me further into its world. I could feel it in my bones, in my soul. It was consuming me, taking over my very essence. I tried to shut my eyes, to block it out, but no matter what I did, the app was always there, its presence suffocating. I felt the walls closing in, the space around me shrinking, and I realized that I wasn't just trapped in the app was inside me now. It had taken my mind, my body, my soul. It had hollowed me out and replaced everything that I was with a distorted version of myself. And then the voices came. Hundreds of voices, all at once, speaking over each other, each one more distorted than the last. Some were screaming, others laughing, but all of them were demanding something from me. The noise was deafening, overwhelming, drowning out everything else. Join us. Be one of us. You can never escape. The figure holding me twisted its grip, and suddenly, I felt a sharp, searing pain run through my arm. I screamed, finally a sound, and tried to pull away, but the figure wouldn't let go. The pain was unbearable, and it felt like it was pulling something out of me, something vital. You will never leave. The words echoed in my mind, sending a fresh wave of terror through me. I wasn't just a part of the game. I was the game. The app had made me its player, its puppet, and now I was nothing more than a cog in its machine. The faces around me, those poor souls who'd been trapped just like me, were no longer human. They had become something else, something monstrous. Their eyes were hollow, their faces distorted beyond recognition. They had been consumed by the app, just as I was being consumed now. I wanted to fight back, to scream, to do anything to escape, but the app had already taken me. It had already taken my soul, my will, my control, and now I was part of it, an eternal player in its game, a pawn in a digital nightmare that would never end. The growl returned, louder this time, and I could feel the darkness pressing on all sides. The figures around me were closing in, their twisted faces leering, their eyes hungry. I realized in that moment that they weren't trapped here like I had been. They were waiting for me to join them, waiting for me to become one of them. You're one of us now. The app's voice whispered in my ear, cold and chilling, and I felt my body begin to change. I could feel my mind unraveling, my thoughts slipping away, becoming distorted and warped. The app was reshaping me, remaking me into something else, something that belonged to it. I could feel it now, the app's power flowing through me, its tendrils reaching deep inside, taking control. My body wasn't my own anymore. My mind wasn't my own. I was a puppet, a player, a part of the game, and there was no escape. I was trapped forever. The game had consumed me, and now I was the one watching others. The world around me was a blur, a series of broken images and distorted sounds. I was no longer sure what was real and what wasn't. Everything felt wrong, like I was living inside someone else's nightmare. My body, my mind, none of it belonged to me anymore. It was as if I had become part of the app itself, a shadow of who I once was, lost within the system, just another player trapped in its endless cycle. I tried to move, to think, but the app's presence was overwhelming. It wrapped around me like a suffocating fog, distorting my every thought, every action. The other faces, those poor lost souls, were still there, still watching, still waiting. I could feel their eyes on me, their silent pleas for help ringing in my mind. But I couldn't help them. I was just as trapped as they were. The app's grip tightened, pulling me deeper into its web, and I felt a surge of panic rise within me. How long had I been here? How long had I been trapped in this digital prison? The days felt like weeks, weeks like months, and all the while, the app watched, its eyes always on me, always waiting for me to break, to surrender. But I couldn't. I couldn't give in, not without a fight. I reached for my phone, as if by some miracle, it would give me the answers I needed. But when I looked at the screen, the message was there again, more chilling than ever. You can never leave. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone away, but my hands trembled, my fingers numb, as if my body had betrayed me completely. The phone was me now. The app had become a part of my very essence, and no matter what I did, I couldn't escape it. The faces on the screen were no longer just images. They were voices, whispering to me, calling to me, urging me to join them. Their eyes burned into my soul, their expressions frozen in perpetual terror. You're one of us now. The app's voice wasn't just coming from my phone anymore. It was inside my head, whispering in my ear, pulling at my very core. The line between the digital world and reality was blurring, and I couldn't tell which one was real. I could feel myself slipping away, becoming more and more consumed by the app, by the game. My thoughts were becoming jumbled, fragmented. I couldn't hold on to who I was, who I used to be. The world around me began to twist and bend, warping into something unrecognizable. The faces around me were no longer just faces. They were shifting, morphing into monstrous forms, their bodies contorting in unnatural ways. Some had long, gnarled arms, while others had eyes that burned with a fiery intensity. They were no longer human. They were things, creatures of the app, trapped in this digital purgatory, just as I was. I stumbled back, trying to move away, but the ground beneath me was slick and shifting, as though the very earth was being manipulated by the app itself. The shadows stretched long and dark, reaching for me, pulling me closer. The figure from before, the one whose face had mirrored mine, was there too, standing just beyond the shadows, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It was waiting for me to step forward, to accept my fate. You can't escape. The voice was all around me now, reverberating through my bones. I could feel the app's tendrils, its grip tightening around my chest, my heart. I gasped for air, but was like breathing through water, thick and suffocating. I wasn't in control anymore. The app was in control. It was bending reality itself to keep me trapped here. Then something shifted. It was subtle at first, just a flicker of movement in the corner of my vision, a shadow in the distance. But as I focused on it, I realized it was more than just a shadow. It was movement, something alive, something that shouldn't be. The figure was moving, its shape shifting, but it wasn't coming closer. It was receding, slowly fading into the distance, its glow dimming. The darkness began to pull back, as if a veil was being lifted. And for the first time since I had downloaded the app, I felt something, a sliver of hope. I took a step forward, unsure what to expect. The app's grip on me loosened ever so slightly. Enough for me to move, enough for me to breathe. The faces on the screen stopped shifting, stopped staring at me with those hollow, pleading eyes. They were still there, but they were distant. The growls, the whispers, they faded like echoes of something long past. I reached out toward the figure, toward the fading glow, and as I did, the world around me began to unravel. The distorted images, the twisted faces, all of it began to fall apart, as though the app itself was losing its power over me. But then, just as quickly as it had begun, the glow vanished. The shadows returned, consuming everything once more. The faces began to twist again, their features becoming monstrous and warped. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. It was all slipping away again, slipping into the abyss of the app's control. You're one of us. The voice, once again, was in my head. The words were final, inevitable. The app had won. There was no escaping it. I had been pulled into its world, and there was no going back. My body, my mind, everything I had once known was gone. And as the screen flickered, the message flashed one last time. Welcome to the game. But it wasn't just me trapped in the game. It was everyone. All the faces, all the souls, all the lost players who had come before me. The app had consumed them, just as it had consumed me. It was a never-ending cycle, an endless loop of players being watched, being controlled, their lives slowly fading into the digital abyss. I was no longer just a player. I was now the one watching, and there was no escape. The game had no end.